An arrogant millionaire bets $5 million that he can tame any woman for marriage within a year. But when his chosen woman unveils a shocking secret tied to his own empire, everything changes. In the dim glow of a high-end bar in downtown Manhattan, John Powell sat at the corner table, surrounded by the usual crowd of admirers. The place was all polished mahogany and soft jazz, the kind of spot where deals were sealed over single malt scotch. His Italian suit fit like a second skin, carrying that faint scent of sandalwood that always turned heads. But tonight, as laughter echoed around him and glasses clinked in toast to his latest business coup, John felt nothing but a hollow ache. Another victory, another empty night. His friends, well, acquaintances really, were deep into their ritual banter. Victor, the hedge fund guy with the perpetual smirk, leaned in. "Come on, John. You've got the world by the tail. Money, power, women throwing themselves at you. What's left to conquer?" John swirled his drink, staring into the amber liquid. He knew the game. These men idolized him, envied him, but they didn't see the void. "Everything's for sale," he said, his voice low and commanding, though laced with a weariness he couldn't quite hide. "Even marriage. You think love's some sacred thing? It's just another transaction." The group erupted in chuckles, but Victor wasn't letting it go. "Prove it then. 5 million says you can't pick a random woman, marry her and keep her around for a full year without her bolting. No cheating, no shortcuts. Just your charm and wallet." John's eyes narrowed. 5 million was pocket change, but the challenge sparked something, a flicker in the boredom. He scanned the room, past the socialites in designer dresses, past the eager smiles. His gaze landed on her, the server, moving with quiet efficiency, balancing trays like it was nothing. Eva Brown, though he didn't know her name yet. She wasn't flashing desperate glances or giggling at patrons. No, she carried herself with a calm assurance, her dark hair tied back simply, her uniform crisp but unassuming. There was a wall there, a silent strength that didn't beg for attention. Inside, John felt a stir. This is tedious, he thought, another night blending into the last. But her, she's different, not the usual fragility that crumbles so easily. It's like a fortress, quiet and unyielding.
Breaking through that pride? Now that could be a real win. He straightened, a slow smile creeping across his face. "You're on," he told Victor, his tone steady, masking the fatigue. The group hooted, slapping backs and raising glasses, but John's mind was already elsewhere. He watched as Eva approached a nearby table, her movements precise, her expression neutral amid the chaos. She didn't flinch at the rowdy laughter or the spilled drinks. If anything, she seemed above it all, focused on her task with a dignity that intrigued him more than it should. As the bet settled in, John leaned back, the weight of his empire pressing down like always. He'd built Powell Industries from nothing, crushing competitors along the way. Marriages? He'd seen them fall apart in boardrooms and bedrooms alike. This would be simple. Pick her, seal the deal, prove his point. Yet, as she passed by without a glance, he wondered why this felt less like a game and more like stepping into unknown territory. The emptiness lingered, but now there was a spark of curiosity, pulling him forward despite himself. Eva wiped down the bar counter with a steady hand, the cloth gliding over the sleek surface as the last of the evening crowd thinned out. The air still hummed with the remnants of laughter and clinking glasses, but her shift was winding down, and she welcomed the quiet. Tips had been decent tonight. Not great, but enough to keep the bills at bay for another week. She kept her focus on the task, her mind already drifting to the small apartment waiting for her, where she'd review those old files again, piecing together the plan that had simmered for years. That's when he approached. John Powell, the man whose face she'd studied in grainy news clippings and corporate profiles. He moved with that effortless authority, like the room parted just for him, his presence filling the space without a word. She felt his eyes on her before she looked up, a prickling awareness that made her straighten her spine. He didn't recognize her. Of course he didn't. Why would he? To him, she was just another face in the service crowd, someone invisible until needed. He slid onto a stool across from her, his suit jacket brushing the edge of the bar. Up close, the sandalwood scent was stronger, mixed with the faint sharpness of whiskey on his breath. He didn't waste time with small talk. Instead, he laid it out plain, his voice smooth but edged with that commanding tone, like he was closing a deal in a boardroom. A marriage contract. 1 year. In exchange, enough money to change her life. No strings beyond the pretense, he said. It was absurd. The kind of offer that might dazzle someone desperate. But Ava felt a cool clarity settle over her. She set the cloth down, meeting his gaze without flinching. Her pulse quickened, but not from fear. John Powell, she thought. Finally, this day comes. He has no idea who I am. Perfect. This wasn't coercion to her. It was an opening, a way in, a chance to claim justice for Michael, to unravel the empire that had crushed him. She shook her head once, firm and direct, turning him down flat. No explanations, just a simple refusal that hung in the air between them. He blinked, caught off guard for a split second, long enough for her to see the flicker of surprise in those sharp eyes. Men like him weren't used to hearing no, especially not from someone wiping spills for a living. He leaned in closer, his tone shifting to something more insistent, laced with that subtle pressure he wielded like a tool. He mentioned her job, the bar's ownership ties to his network, how easily things could shift if she didn't play along. It wasn't a threat outright, but the implication was clear. Options were slim in a city like this, where power pulled strings from the shadows. Ava stood there, the weight of the moment pressing in, but her mind raced ahead. She pictured Michael's face, the way he'd faded under the strain of that ruthless takeover, the despair that had led him to the edge. This man across from her had signed off on it all, calling it business, never looking back. Accepting now wasn't surrender. It was strategy. She'd step into his world, close enough to expose the cracks, to make him face what he'd done. The risk twisted in her gut, but so did the resolve. A quiet fire that had kept her going through the lonely nights. She let the silence stretch just a beat longer, watching him wait, his confidence cracking at the edges. Then, with a measured nod, she agreed. Not eagerly, not brokenly, but on her terms, her voice steady as she laid out a few ground rules of her own. No illusions about what this was. The contract would bind them, but she'd hold her secrets close, using this as the key to unlock the truth. As he slid the initial papers across the bar, a satisfied gleam in his eye, Ava felt the shift. She was no longer on the outside looking in. Now, she was stepping through the door into the heart of his domain, with a plan that hummed like a promise in her veins. The bar's lights dimmed further as the deal sealed itself in that quiet exchange. John rose, adjusting his cufflinks with a nod that suggested he'd won this round, but Eva knew better. As she watched him walk away, the city lights flickering through the windows, a question lingered in the air, not just for her, but for anyone listening close. What would she do now, tangled in the web of her enemy? The game had begun, and she was ready to play it her way. The penthouse atop Powell Tower gleamed like a crown over the city, all glass walls and marble floors that echoed with every step. John had always seen it as his sanctuary, a place where he set the rules and the world bent to them. But now, with Eva moving in, it felt different. Less like a fortress, and more like a stage where an unexpected play was unfolding. The contract was signed, the wedding a quiet affair at City Hall, no fanfare, just paperwork and a ring that sat heavy on her finger. He figured it to be straightforward. Lay out the expectations, provide the luxuries, and watch her fall in line like everyone else. From day one, he started with the basics. He had a stylist deliver a wardrobe full of designer pieces,
Silk gowns, tailored suits in soft pastels, the kind that screamed elegance but whispered submission. "Wear this to the gala tonight," he'd said, pointing to a sleek black dress that hugged every curve just so, meant to turn heads without stealing the spotlight. It was his way, controlling the image, making sure she fit the role of the perfect trophy wife. Money talked, after all, and he'd poured plenty into making her shine on his terms. But Eva had other ideas. She emerged from the dressing room in something from the collection, sure, but altered in subtle ways. A scarf tied her way, adding a pop of bold color that drew the eye, or heels swapped for ones that let her stand taller, more commanding. It wasn't rebellion outright, just a quiet assertion of her taste, elegant, yet unmistakably her own. John watched her across the room, his coffee growing cold in his hand. Why push back, he wondered, a twinge of irritation bubbling up. The others always melted into whatever I wanted. It's like she's rewriting the script. The real tests came in the evenings, at those high-stakes dinners and networking events where deals were made over wine and whispers. He briefed her beforehand. Smile, nod, stay quiet unless spoken to. Let him handle the talk, the power plays. It was how he operated, keeping control in his grip. But at the first cocktail party, when a venture capitalist cornered them with talk of market disruptions, Eva didn't just stand there. She chimed in with a sharp observation about sustainable tech trends, pulling from some article or insight he'd never bothered with. Her voice was calm, measured, cutting through the chatter like a knife through silk. The investor paused, then nodded with genuine respect, even asking her follow-up questions. John felt a jolt, masking it with a sip of his drink. She's not supposed to do that, he thought. His pulse quickening, not from anger, but something else. Frustration, mixed with a reluctant spark. Back home that night, as the city lights twinkled below, he paced the living room while she unpacked a few books onto the shelves. He tried again, setting rules about schedules, about how she'd accompany him to meetings but keep opinions to herself. "It's for the image," he explained, his tone firm, expecting compliance. Yet she met his gaze steadily, offering a counterpoint wrapped in logic. Why not use her skills to strengthen his position? She suggested tweaks to his upcoming presentation, pointing out flaws in the data with a precision that stung. Not rude, just smart, like she was sparring with an equal rather than bowing to a boss. John leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching her move about the space as if she'd always belonged there. The penthouse, once so sterile, now carried traces of her. A vase of fresh flowers on the table, a notebook left open with neat handwriting. It unsettled him. This invasion that wasn't quite unwelcome. Night after night, the pattern repeated. He'd push with gifts, a necklace worth a small fortune meant to dazzle and distract. She'd accept it politely, but wear it with a brooch from her own collection, turning it into something personal. At a board dinner, when talk turned to ethics and acquisitions, she shared a story from her past jobs, highlighting risks he'd overlooked, earning nods from his toughest critics. John found himself listening, really listening, his usual dominance cracking at the edges. What's her angle? He pondered in the quiet hours, staring at the ceiling from his side of the massive bed they shared platonically. She doesn't fold. It's maddening, but damn, it's intriguing. That curiosity gnawed at him, shifting from annoyance to a grudging respect. She wasn't a pawn. She was a player, matching him move for move. For the first time in years, the emptiness that had plagued him felt a little less vast, replaced by the thrill of this unexpected challenge. The bet faded into the background as he began to see her not as a conquest, but as someone who could stand toe-to-toe with him and maybe, just maybe, make him better for it. The ballroom at the Metropolitan Museum buzzed with the soft hum of New York's elite, crystal chandeliers casting a warm glow over tuxedos and evening gowns. It was one of those charity galas John hosted every year, black tie affair for some noble cause, this time clean energy initiatives, though for him it was mostly about networking and tax write-offs. Eva walked beside him, her arm lightly looped through his, playing the part they'd rehearsed. The air smelled of expensive perfumes and fresh orchids arranged in towering centerpieces, and the string quartet in the corner played something classical, soothing the undercurrents of deal-making conversations. She'd chosen her outfit carefully that night, a deep blue gown from the wardrobe he'd provided, but with a simple silver necklace she'd brought from home, a reminder of her own roots amid all this glamour. John had glanced at it earlier, his brow furrowing just a touch, but he hadn't commented. These events were becoming routine now, a few weeks into their arrangement, and she'd learned to navigate them with that quiet poise that seemed to unsettle him. Tonight felt no different at first. Smiles exchanged with strangers, small talk about the art on the walls, her keeping her responses brief but insightful when needed. Then came Marcus Hale, an old rival from John's early days in the industry. Hale sauntered over during a lull in the mingling, his face flushed from one too many glasses of champagne, his suit straining a bit at the seams. He was the type who'd lost big in a deal years back, the kind that held grudges like treasures. John stiffened slightly as Hale approached, but he kept his cool, exchanging the usual pleasantries about market trends and mutual acquaintances. Eva stood there sipping her sparkling water, sensing the tension but staying composed. It happened fast. Hale's eyes slid over to her, lingering too long, his smile turning sly. He leaned in, voice loud enough for nearby guests to catch, dropping a barbed comment about how John always had an eye for ambitious companions who knew a good opportunity when they saw one. The implication hung heavy. Gold digger, trophy, someone trading looks for luxury. A few chuckles rippled from the circle around them, the kind that masked discomfort, and Eva felt the sting, her cheeks warming despite her resolve. It wasn't the first whisper she'd overheard since stepping into this world, but hearing it spat out like that, in front of everyone, cut deeper than expected. Before she could respond, John moved. It wasn't calculated, not like his boardroom maneuvers. He stepped forward, placing himself squarely between her and Hale, his hand gently but firmly on her arm as if shielding her from a storm. His voice came out low and sharp, cutting through the air like a blade, no shouting, just that unyielding authority that made people back down. He reminded Hale of his own failed ventures, how bitterness didn't suit a man who'd squandered his chances, and suggested he find better company elsewhere. The words were precise, dismantling Hale's ego without raising the volume. But the intensity in John's eyes was raw, protective in a way that surprised even him. The circle fell silent, Hale muttering something under his breath before slinking away, tail between his legs. Guests averted their gazes, the quartet's music suddenly seeming louder in the awkward pause. Eva stood there, her heart pounding not from the insult, but from the unexpected warmth of John's stance. I should be glad he's got enemies like that, she thought, a flicker of satisfaction stirring. It means he's not untouchable. But then there was that strange sense of safety, the way he'd positioned himself like a barrier, instinctive and real. It unsettled her, this glimpse of something human beneath the armor. Snap out of it, Eva. He's still the one who took everything from Michael. Don't forget why you're here. John turned to her then, his hand lingering a moment longer than necessary before dropping away.
He scanned her face, searching for any sign of hurt, and for a split second, his usual composure cracked. What the hell was that, he wondered, his mind racing. It's just the bet, right? Keeping up appearances. But no, that wasn't it. Seeing that flash of vulnerability in her eyes, the way she'd held her chin high despite the jab, it twisted something inside him. He couldn't stand it, the thought of her feeling small in a room full of sharks. This wasn't strategy. It was gut reaction, a pull he hadn't anticipated. As the evening picked up again, with apologies from a few onlookers and the flow of conversation resuming, they moved to a quieter corner. John fetched her a fresh drink without asking, a small gesture that spoke volumes. Eva accepted it, their fingers brushing briefly, and in that touch something shifted, just a hint subtle as a whisper. The tension between them wasn't just adversarial anymore. There was a thread of connection weaving in, fragile but undeniable. For the first time she saw past the tycoon to the man, and he glimpsed the strength that made her more than a partner in a deal. The night wore on, but that moment lingered, a quiet promise of what might come if they let the walls come down. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel shimmered under a sea of lights, crystal glasses tinkling like distant bells, as guests in tailored suits and sparkling dresses mingled to celebrate the 10th anniversary of Powell Industries. It was the event of the year for John's world. Investors, board members, and influencers all gathered to toast his empire, the air thick with the scent of fresh roses and aged bourbon. Eva stood at the edge of the crowd, her elegant gown flowing like midnight silk, but her mind was a storm behind the calm facade. She'd spent months preparing for this night, slipping through the cracks of his security, gathering emails, records, and witness statements that painted the ugly truth of his past deals. The folder tucked in her clutch felt like a weapon, heavy with the weight of what it could unleash. She watched John from across the room, working the crowd with that effortless charm, shaking hands and sharing laughs that never quite reached his eyes. He'd changed in subtle ways these past weeks, less commanding in private moments, more attentive, like that night at the museum had cracked something open. But tonight wasn't about that. This was for Michael, for the man who'd built a small tech firm with dreams and grit, only to have it crushed under Powell's aggressive takeover. The layoffs, the forced bankruptcy, the despair that had swallowed him whole. It all led back here, to this glittering facade of success. As the evening built to its peak, the MC called for toasts, and John took the stage, his voice steady as he spoke of innovation and growth, the crowd hanging on every word. Ava's heart raced, her fingers trembling slightly as she clutched her glass. This is it, she thought, the moment she'd rehearsed in quiet hours alone. Tonight, I expose it all. For Michael. But why did her hands shake like this? Why did flashes of John stepping in front of her at that charity event keep intruding, his protective stance replaying like a loop? It was confusing, this pull between vengeance and the unexpected warmth she'd felt in his presence, the shared glances over dinner, the way he'd started listening to her ideas as if they mattered. She waited for the right beat after his speech wrapped and applause filled the room, when attention turned to a slideshow of the company's milestones. That's when she made her move, approaching a cluster of key investors near the front, her steps measured, but her pulse thundering. She didn't plan to scream accusations. No, that wasn't her style. Instead, she'd plant the seeds subtly at first, sharing concerns backed by the documents she'd copied, letting the truth spread like ripples in a pond. But as she drew closer, doubt crept in, a whisper questioning if this destruction was truly justice or just more pain. The band struck up a soft melody, and couples drifted to the dance floor, but Ava stayed focused, pulling out her phone to reference a key email chain, the one showing how John's team had manipulated stock values to force Michael's company under, ignoring pleas for fair play. She imagined the fallout, whispers turning to outrage, John's face paling as his legacy unraveled.
He deserves this, she reminded herself, steeling her nerves. Yet there was that nagging image again, John's hand on her arm, shielding her from insult, his eyes fierce not for show, but for her. It made her hesitate, standing there amid the swirl of gowns and laughter, torn between the plan that had driven her for so long and the budding feelings that complicated everything. A waiter passed with a tray of champagne, and she took one, sipping to steady herself, the bubbles sharp on her tongue. The room felt smaller now, the lights brighter, as if the whole evening hinged on her next step. She spotted John glancing her way, a small smile crossing his face, unaware of the storm brewing. Why does it hurt to think of breaking him? The question echoed in her mind, a crack in her resolve. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was a line she might cross, destroying not only his world, but the fragile bridge they'd built. Still, Michael's memory tugged at her, a quiet ache that demanded closure. She squared her shoulders, ready to approach the group, the tension coiling like a spring about to snap. The night was far from over, and whatever came next would change them both forever. The applause from John's speech still echoed faintly as the slideshow flickered on the massive screen behind him, highlighting glossy images of mergers, skyscrapers, and smiling teams, testaments to a decade of relentless growth. He stepped down from the stage, a glass of scotch in hand, feeling the familiar rush of approval from the room. Investors clapped him on the back, their compliments blending into a comforting hum, but his eyes kept drifting to Eva. She moved through the crowd with that quiet grace, heading toward a knot of board members near the front, her expression unreadable. Something about her tonight felt off, a tension in her posture that he couldn't place, but he brushed it aside. After all, the gala was going perfectly, his empire on full display. She reached the group just as the music softened for a brief intermission, and instead of the usual small talk, she began speaking in that steady voice of hers, drawing their attention without effort. It started innocently enough. A story, she called it, an inspiring tale from the underbelly of the business world. John lingered nearby, half listening as he chatted with a partner, but her words pulled him in. She described a young entrepreneur named Michael, full of ideas and drive, building a small company from his garage with nothing but passion and late nights. The details were vivid. How he'd innovated in tech, creating software that could change lives, only to face a giant corporation that saw opportunity in his vulnerability. The giant, she said, swooped in with aggressive tactics, undercutting prices, poaching talent, manipulating deals until the little guy had no choice but to fold. Michael's world crumbled, jobs lost, dreams shattered, the weight of failure driving him to a dark place where hope ran out. She painted the despair so clearly, the isolation, the final act of desperation, that a hush fell over the listeners. John felt a chill creep up his spine, the name Michael tugging at some buried memory. Where have I heard that before, he thought, his grip tightening on the glass. It was just a metaphor, right? A cautionary tale to spice up the evening, maybe even a nod to ethical business practices. But her tone carried an edge, personal and pointed, and as she spoke, whispers spread through the nearby clusters of guests. Then came the turn. Ava paused, her eyes meeting his across the short distance, steady and unflinching. She didn't raise her voice or point fingers. Instead, she revealed the punchline with a calm that cut deeper than any shout. Michael wasn't fictional. He was real. Michael Brown, the man behind a startup Powell Industries had acquired years ago in a cutthroat deal John had greenlit himself. And she?
Ava Brown, his widow, the woman who'd lost everything because of that business decision. The words landed like a slow-motion collapse, the room tilting as murmurs erupted, phones buzzing with quick texts, eyes darting between them. John stood frozen, the scotch forgotten, a roar building in his ears. Michael Brown? That name, it can't be. Flashes hit him, the reports from back then, the numbers that justified the takeover, the way he'd dismissed the fallout as collateral in the game of empires. He'd signed off on it all, pushing for the aggressive strategy that buried the competition, never once considering the human cost. I ruined a man. No, I ruined her man. Her husband. The realization crashed over him, wave after wave. Every moment they'd shared, from the bar to the penthouse, the arguments, the quiet dinners, that protective instinct at the museum. It wasn't chance or a bet. It was calculated, a setup for this exact unraveling. All this time, it wasn't a game for her. It was revenge. My whole world, it's crumbling. His chest tightened, the arrogance that had armored him for years shattering like glass underfoot. Guests stared, some with shock, others with that hungry curiosity that feeds scandals. But John barely noticed. He saw only her, standing there composed, the pain she'd hidden now laid bare in her gaze. The slideshow behind him looped obliviously, celebrating victories that suddenly tasted like ash.
How had he not seen it? The hints in her stories, the way she'd probed his past deals, it all clicked into place, a puzzle he'd been too self-assured to solve. Emptiness gave way to a raw ache, not just for the empire teetering on exposure, but for the man he'd become, the lives he'd trampled without a backward glance. The band resumed playing, a upbeat tune that jarred against the tension, but the damage was done. Whispers turned to open questions, reporters in the crowd jotting notes, the air thick with the scent of impending fallout. John felt exposed, stripped of the control he'd clung to, left with only the stark truth staring back at him. This wasn't just a revelation. It was the end of the illusion, and in its wake, a profound sorrow for what he'd destroyed and what he might have lost forever in the process. The gala carried on around them, but for John, time had stopped, the pieces of his life scattering like confetti in a storm. As the truth crashes down, John's empire of illusions shatters, revealing the human wreckage he caused. Eva stands tall in her grief, a testament to resilience. But forgiveness, if it comes, must be forged in fire. Listener, if you feel the pull of mercy earned through genuine remorse, share forgiveness below. Let it be your vote for healing justice. The penthouse felt like a tomb now, the vast windows framing a city that pulsed with life below, indifferent to the silence up here. Eva had left hours after the gala, her departure quiet and final. No slammed doors, just a packed bag and a cab waiting downstairs. John hadn't tried to stop her. How could he, after the bombs she'd dropped in front of everyone? The whispers had followed him out of the ballroom, but he'd waved off the concerned calls from his team, retreating here to face the wreckage alone. For the first time, the space he'd always prized for its isolation pressed in on him, the marble floors cold underfoot, the designer furniture mocking his solitude with its untouched perfection. He poured himself a drink, the scotch burning a familiar path down his throat, but it did nothing to dull the edge tonight. The place still carried faint traces of her, a forgotten scarf draped over a chair, the scent of her shampoo lingering in the bathroom. He wandered into his office, the one room where he'd always felt in control, surrounded by screens and files that mapped his conquests. But now, he pulled out the old archives, the ones buried in digital vaults, because no one liked revisiting the messy details. The Michael Brown acquisition, he'd barely remembered it as more than a line item, a strategic move that boosted Powell Industries' market share overnight. As the files loaded, John sank into his chair, the glow of the monitor casting harsh shadows on his face. There it was. Emails from his legal team outlining the pressure tactics, reports on undercutting Brown's suppliers to force a fire sale, memos justifying the layoffs as necessary streamlining. He'd signed every one, his digital signature bold and unhesitating. What have I done? The thought hit him like a gut punch, replaying Eva's words from the gala, the pain in her voice as she laid out Michael's story. It wasn't just business. It was destruction, methodical and cold. He'd stripped away a man's livelihood, his dignity, pushing him to that final, irreversible step. And for what? A quarterly report that padded his bonuses? He scrolled deeper, forcing himself to read the personal impacts, testimonies from former employees about families uprooted, dreams deferred. Michael's name appeared in a footnote, a suicide note, referenced in a liability waiver they'd made his widow sign. Eva. Her. The woman who'd walked into his life, not by chance, but with purpose, and he'd fallen for her anyway, the way she challenged him, the quiet strength that had filled the voids he'd ignored for years. Now it all twisted into irony. He'd been loving the very person he'd broken, without even knowing it. I took everything from him, and now I'm in love with his wife. I don't deserve forgiveness. Not from her. Not from anyone. The weight settled heavy in his chest, a mix of exhaustion and self-loathing that made his hands tremble as he closed the files. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling, the city lights blurring through unshed tears. This wasn't the John Powell who'd built an empire on ruthlessness. This was a man stripped bare, confronting the monster in the mirror. The loneliness gnawed deeper than ever, no distractions left to hide behind. But amid the torment, a spark flickered, a quiet resolve to face it all, to pay the price, whatever it took. He didn't know if redemption was possible, but sitting there in the empty penthouse, he knew he had to try. The night stretched on, silent except for the distant hum of the city, as John began to grapple with the man he needed to become. The small coffee shop on the edge of the city was a far cry from the glittering world Eva had left behind. Worn wooden tables, the hum of an espresso machine, and the faint aroma of fresh grounds mixing with rain from the street outside. She'd chosen this place for its anonymity, a spot where no one knew her name or her story, just a quiet corner to rebuild after the gala's fallout. Days had passed since that night, the headlines buzzing with speculation about Powell Industries' past dealings, but Eva kept her head down, focusing on the simple routine of her old life. A rented apartment, job applications, and the empty space where Michael's photo still sat on the nightstand. That's when John showed up, unannounced, his usual polished look frayed at the edges, stubble shadowing his jaw, his coat damp from the drizzle, eyes carrying the weight of sleepless nights. He spotted her at a back table nursing a black coffee and approached with hesitant steps, like a man navigating a minefield. She saw him coming, her stomach twisting, but she didn't look away or flee. Instead, she set her cup down, her face a mask of cool detachment, the kind that spoke volumes without a word. He pulled out the chair across from her, sitting without invitation, his hands clasped on the table as if holding himself together. The words came tumbling out, raw and unpracticed, an apology that poured from him like a confession, acknowledging the pain he'd caused, the blindness of his ambition, how he'd never meant to destroy lives, but had anyway. He spoke of Michael with a reverence that surprised her, admitting the details he'd uncovered in those files, the regret that gnawed at him now. It wasn't polished or rehearsed. It was messy, his voice cracking just once, pleading for a chance to make it right, or at least to explain. Eva listened, her expression unchanging, a wall of silence building with every syllable he uttered. She didn't interrupt, didn't yell or tear up, none of the dramatics that might have given him an opening. Instead, she let the quiet stretch after he finished, her eyes fixed on the steam rising from her cup, the rain pattering against the window like a distant drum. Seeing him like this, broken and pleading, I thought I'd feel some satisfaction, she reflected, a hollow ache settling in her chest. But it's just emptiness. What good are words now? They can't bring Michael back. Can't erase the nights I spent alone, piecing together the why of it all. Still, a small part of her twinged at his vulnerability, the way his shoulders slumped, the man who'd once commanded rooms, now reduced to this quiet desperation. It hurt, unexpectedly, to witness his fall, but she pushed it down, holding the line. He waited, hope flickering in his gaze, but she offered nothing, no absolution, no anger to latch onto, just a brief nod, acknowledging he'd spoken, before she gathered her things and stood, leaving him there, with the echo of her unspoken refusal. The bell above the door jingled as she stepped out into the rain, umbrella unfurling like a shield, the distance between them feeling vast and unbridgeable. John remained seated, staring at the empty chair, the sting of her silence cutting deeper than any words could. For Eva, walking away wasn't victory, it was survival, a necessary barrier against the complicated pull he still had on her heart. The city swallowed her up, but the encounter lingered, a quiet reminder that healing wasn't simple, and some wounds demanded time before they could even begin to mend. The days blurred into a haze after that coffee shop encounter, John's world shrinking to the confines of his office and the relentless churn of self-examination. The empire he'd built still hummed around him. Meetings droned on via video calls, stock tickers flickered on screens, but he moved through it all like a ghost, the sting of Eva's silence a constant companion. Apologies, he'd learned, were cheap currency. They bounced off her like rain on glass, leaving him drenched in regret, but no closer to redemption. If words wouldn't bridge the gap, then actions might. It started small, a decision made in the quiet hours before dawn, when sleep evaded him and the city lights mocked his isolation. He reached out to an old contact, a retired investigator named Harlan, who'd made a career out of digging up corporate skeletons without bias or fanfare. No in-house team this time. John wanted independence, outsiders who wouldn't sugarcoat the findings to protect his ego or the company's bottom line. Harlan's firm was discreet, expensive, and thorough, perfect for what he needed. Over a secure line, John laid out the task, comb through every major deal Powell Industries had closed in the last decade. Not just the wins, but the casualties. Flag the ones where corners were cut, where smaller players got squeezed out, where lives might have been upended like Michael's. No holds barred, he instructed, his voice steady despite the knot in his gut. This wasn't about damage control. It was excavation, unearthing the buried costs of his ambition. The team got to work fast, pulling records from archives, interviewing former employees and rivals under NDAs, piecing together timelines that John had long filed away as closed chapters. He pored over the initial reports in his penthouse, the space still echoing with emptiness, papers spread across the dining table where he and Ava had once shared meals. One file detailed a software startup in Seattle, absorbed in a hostile bid that left its founder bankrupt and battling depression. Another highlighted a family-run manufacturer in the Midwest, forced to shutter after Powell undercut their contracts, scattering workers to uncertain futures. Names jumped out, real people, not just footnotes. Sarah, who'd lost her home. Tomas, whose health had crumbled under the stress. This isn't just about Ava, John thought, rubbing his temples as the weight settled heavier. It's about who I've been. I have to face it all, one by one. He didn't stop at reading. He cross-referenced, digging deeper himself in late-night sessions, the glow of his laptop the only light in the room. Coffee went cold beside him as he traced email chains from years back, seeing his own signatures on decisions that prioritized profit over people. The patterns emerged, clear and damning. Aggressive tactics dressed as strategy, blind spots where empathy should have been. It hurt. This mirror held up to his past, but the pain fueled him. For the first time, he saw the ripple effects, the families splintered, the dreams deferred, not as abstract collateral, but as stories mirroring Michael's, each one as echo of the destruction he'd wrought. Harlan's updates came weekly, each one a brick in the wall of accountability John was building around himself. One report uncovered an overlooked settlement with a whistleblower who'd flagged unethical practices in an early merger. Another revealed quiet lawsuits buried under gag orders. John didn't flinch from the details. He requested more, pushing the team to interview those affected, to quantify the human toll. If I'm going to change, it starts here, he reflected, staring out at the skyline that had once symbolized his triumphs. Not for show, not to win her back, just to be better than the man who caused this. As the investigation deepened, whispers spread through the company, rumors of an internal audit, questions about John's sudden reclusiveness. He ignored the board's concerned emails, focusing instead on the growing dossier, a roadmap of wrongs that demanded righting. It wasn't easy. Doubts crept in during the quiet moments, wondering if this self-inflicted reckoning could ever be enough. But the resolve held, a quiet fire kindling where arrogance had once burned. The first step wasn't about quick fixes. It was the beginning of unraveling the old John, piece by piece, in hopes of forging something worthier. The city carried on below, oblivious, but for him, the real work had just begun, one unearthed truth at a time. The reports from Harlan's team piled up like accusations on John's desk, each one a thread leading back to another life he'd tangled in his climb to the top. One name kept surfacing: Elias Grant, the founder of a mid-sized logistics firm that Powell Industries had targeted 5 years back. Grant's company had been innovative, streamlining supply chains for small businesses. But John's team had seen it as a threat, undercutting bids, spreading rumors of instability, forcing a fire sale that left Grant on the brink of ruin. The man had fought in court, but outgunned and outspent, he'd lost everything: his business, his savings, even his family's trust as debts mounted. John remembered signing off on the strategy, calling it smart positioning. But now, in the harsh light of hindsight, it was just another scar on someone else's story. He didn't announce his intentions or alert the press. This wasn't for show. Instead, he booked a quiet flight to Chicago, where Grant now lived in a modest suburb, far from the corporate battlegrounds. The drive from the airport took him through tree-lined streets, past homes with bikes and driveways and gardens in bloom, a world away from his penthouse isolation. Grant's house was unassuming, a 2-story with faded paint and a porch swing creaking in the breeze. John parked a block away, gathering the folder in his briefcase, financial records, internal memos admitting to the aggressive tactics, evidence that could reopen old wounds but also clear Grant's name. When Grant opened the door, his face hardened at the sight of John, years of resentment flashing in his eyes like storm clouds. He was older now, lines etched deeper from the stress. But there was still that fighter's stance. John didn't push. He stood there on the doorstep, rain starting to patter lightly, and explained in simple terms why he'd come. Not to buy silence or rewrite history, but to own it. He handed over a check, enough to cover the lost equity, the legal fees, the years of scraping by, but that was just the start. The real weight was in the documents, proof from Powell's own archives showing how the deal had been rigged, admissions that Grant's firm hadn't failed on merit, but under foul play. Use it however you need, John said quietly. No fanfare, just the truth laid bare. It could mean lawsuits against his company, bad press, even personal liability. But he didn't flinch from that. This was the cost, paid without strings. Grant took the folder with steady hands, flipping through pages in the doorway as his wife peered from behind, her expression shifting from wariness to quiet surprise. They didn't invite him in, why would they? But as John turned to leave, Grant's voice stopped him, a gruff acknowledgement that this changed things, at least a little. No forgiveness handed out like a gift, but a door cracked open to healing. John walked back to his car, the rain soaking through his coat, feeling the first real lift in the heaviness that had dogged him. This isn't just fixing one mess, he thought, sliding into the driver's seat. It's unraveling the whole damn pattern. One step at a time, no shortcuts. Back in New York, Eva went about her days in the rhythm she'd reclaimed. Mornings at a new job in a nonprofit, evenings with books and walks in the park, piecing together a life without the shadows of the past. She avoided the business news mostly, but one quiet afternoon, scrolling through her phone over lunch, a small article caught her eye in a local finance blog. Nothing splashy, just a brief piece about Elias Grant, the former logistics mogul, announcing plans to relaunch his firm with fresh funding and cleared allegations. The story mentioned anonymous documents surfacing that exposed unethical practices by a major player. Powell Industries implied, but not named outright, restoring Grant's reputation and sparking talks of industry reform. She set her sandwich down, rereading the lines, the pieces clicking into place. No mention of John, no press conferences or grand gestures. It had been done in the shadows, quietly, like someone truly committed to righting wrongs without seeking credit. He's doing this without fanfare, she reflected, a warmth stirring despite herself. No cameras, no spin. He's actually trying to fix what he broke, and not just for me. It surprised her, this spark of respect flickering back to life, softening the edges of her guarded heart. The article faded as she pocketed her phone, but the thought lingered through the afternoon, a subtle shift in the air, hinting that maybe, just maybe, the man she'd known was capable of becoming someone new. The city bustled around her, but for the first time in weeks, the weight felt a little lighter. The possibility of change, not so distant after all. The conference room at Powell Tower buzzed with a different energy that morning, not the usual hum of deal-making, but a tense anticipation as reporters and board members filed in, cameras flashing and notebooks at the ready. John had called this press conference himself, no PR spin, no scripted talking points vetted by lawyers. The room overlooked the city, skyscrapers stretching like fingers toward a gray sky, a view that once filled him with pride, but now served as a stark reminder of the heights he'd climbed at others' expense. He'd spent the night reviewing the final reports from Harlan's team, the dossier now a thick binder on the podium, its pages dog-eared from his relentless scrutiny. This wasn't about facing an external villain, it was John squaring off against the legacy he'd built, brick by ruthless brick. He stepped up to the microphone, his suit fitting looser these days from the weight he'd lost in sleepless weeks, his face etched with lines that spoke of battles fought in silence. The flashes intensified as he began, his voice steady, but carrying a humility that surprised even the longtime observers. He didn't dodge or deflect. Instead, he laid it out plain, the unethical strategies that had fueled Powell Industries' rise, the aggressive takeovers, the manipulated markets, the small businesses crushed underfoot in the name of growth. He named names, not to shame others, but to own his role, referencing the deals with Michael Brown, Elias Grant, and a dozen more like them. These were just numbers on a balance sheet, he said, his tone measured, the words coming from a place deeper than any boardroom pitch. They were lives disrupted, dreams deferred, and I was the architect of that pain.
The room grew hushed, murmurs rippling as he pulled no punches, admitting how ambition had blinded him to the human cost. No excuses about cutthroat competition or market demands, just accountability, raw and unfiltered. Then came the announcements that sent shockwaves. His resignation as CEO, effective immediately, handing the reins to a trusted executive who'd long advocated for ethical reforms. But he didn't stop there. He revealed the creation of a foundation, funded by the bulk of his personal fortune. Hundreds of millions redirected from yachts and estates to supporting startups and small firms facing corporate giants. Grants for legal aid, mentorship programs, recovery funds for those who'd been squeezed out. It was a dismantling of his wealth, a deliberate torching of the empire's excesses to build something that healed rather than harmed. This is the only way, he thought, as the cameras clicked, the weight lifting slightly with each word spoken. Burn down the old me, so something new can rise from the ashes. Whether Eva forgives me or not, this is what I have to do. It's bigger than us now. The doubt lingered, a quiet echo of the man who'd once measured worth in stock prices, but resolve pushed it aside. He'd seen the ripples of his actions in those reports, families rebuilt, like Grant's relaunch, sparks of hope where despair had reigned. This press conference wasn't a grand gesture for applause, it was closure, a public reckoning that stripped away the facade and left him exposed, but freer. Questions flew from the reporters, sharp probes about timelines, potential lawsuits, the future of the company, but John answered with transparency, no evasion, his responses grounded in the facts from the binder he referenced openly. Board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, whispers of fallout already brewing, but he met their gazes without flinching. This was his inheritance to them, a company forced to evolve, policies rewritten to prioritize fairness over conquest. As the session wrapped, he stepped back from the podium, the room erupting in a mix of flashes and hurried notes, the air thick with the scent of fresh coffee and the undercurrent of change. Outside, the city pulsed on, indifferent to one man's unraveling, but for John, the walk back to his office felt like shedding skin. Calls would come, outraged investors, curious allies, but he'd face them as the man he was becoming, not the tycoon he'd been. The foundation's work would start small, outreach to those in the reports, quiet partnerships to empower the overlooked. It wasn't about erasing the past, it was about building a legacy worth leaving, one that echoed Eva's strength and Michael's unfulfilled dreams. The gray sky broke with a hint of sun as he glanced out the window, a subtle sign that even in surrender, there could be light ahead. The confrontation was over, but the real journey, the one toward purpose, had only just begun. The small apartment Eva had rented after leaving the penthouse felt like a sanctuary these days. Simple walls lined with books, a cozy chair by the window overlooking a quiet street, the faint hum of traffic a comforting backdrop to her thoughts. She'd followed John's press conference on her laptop, the live stream pulling her in despite her resolve to move on. There he was, not in his usual power suit commanding a boardroom, but standing humbly before the world, dismantling the empire he'd built with his own hands. Resigning, pouring his fortune into that foundation. It wasn't a flashy redemption. It was real. A man stripping away the trappings of success to face the core of who he'd been. She watched him speak, his voice carrying that new weariness mixed with quiet strength, and something inside her shifted, like a locked door creaking open after months of rust. She closed the laptop, the screen's glow fading as afternoon light filtered through the curtains. He's given up everything, she thought, her coffee growing cold on the table beside her. Not just words this time, but his whole life rearranged to make amends. I'm not forgiving the old him, the one who took Michael away, but this new man, he's choosing differently day by day. The article about Elias Grant had been the first hint, then whispers of other quiet restitutions reaching her through mutual contacts. It wasn't about winning her back. He hadn't even reached out since the coffee shop. This was genuine change, earned through actions that spoke louder than any apology ever could. That evening, she found herself walking to his new address,
a modest brownstone on a tree-lined block far from the tower's glare. The air carried the scent of falling leaves, early autumn Christmas nipping at her coat as she climbed the steps. He answered the door, looking surprised, but not guarded, his shirt sleeves rolled up, a stack of foundation papers scattered on a nearby table, like evidence of his ongoing work. No grand gestures awaited her inside. Just a simple living room with unpacked boxes and a pot of tea brewing, the space reflecting a life in transition, stripped down to essentials. They sat across from each other on worn couches, the silence comfortable at first, like old acquaintances reacquainting. Eva didn't rush. She let the moment breathe, her eyes tracing the lines on his face that hadn't been there before. When she spoke, it was soft, acknowledging the press conference, the foundation, the way he'd faced his past without hiding. He listened, his posture open, no defensiveness in his gaze. Then came his words, not a dramatic declaration, but a mature admission. How losing her had cracked him open. But the real transformation came from seeing the harm he'd caused, from wanting to build something better, with or without her. It was a promise of partnership, grounded in equality, two adults committing to growth, side by side, no pedestals or power plays. Eva felt the last barriers crumble, a warmth spreading through her as she reached across the table, her hand finding his. This isn't about forgetting, she reflected, the touch electric, yet grounding. It's choosing love for who he is now, a man who's learned, who's still learning. Forgiveness flowed naturally, not forced or dramatic, but as a quiet acceptance that healed them both. Their conversation stretched into the night, words weaving around shared futures, collaborating on the foundation, building a life based on respect and shared purpose. It wasn't a fairy tale reunion. It was real, two people who'd walked through fire, emerging stronger together. As the tea cooled and the streetlights flickered on outside, Eva leaned in, their foreheads touching in a moment of unspoken vow, the weight of the past lifting, to make room for what lay ahead. The city whispered on, but in that simple room, they'd found their way back, not to who they were, but to who they could be. 2 years slipped by like pages in a well-loved book, and the brownstone that had once been John's quiet retreat had blossomed into a warm home, filled with laughter and light. Morning started with the scent of fresh coffee brewing in the kitchen, sunlight streaming through windows onto wooden floors scattered with toys and books. John and Eva had married in a simple ceremony under blooming cherry trees in the park, surrounded by close friends and the people they'd helped through the foundation. No extravagance, just vows spoken from the heart, promising partnership in every step. Now they ran the charity together, a thriving organization that had grown from John's initial seed into a beacon for small businesses facing corporate Goliaths. Eva had stepped into her role as co-director with that same quiet confidence she'd always carried, her ideas shaping programs that empowered entrepreneurs like Michael once was. Mentorship for innovators, legal aid for the underdogs, grants that turned dreams into realities. She'd become a respected voice in the community, speaking at conferences with poise, her story inspiring others to stand tall amid adversity. John watched her with a soft pride, no longer the tycoon dictating terms, but a partner who listened, supported, and learned alongside her. He transformed too. The sharpness of his old ambition softened into warmth, finding joy in the small victories. A startup saved from collapse, a family reunited after hardship, purpose filling the voids that wealth never could. Their days wove between foundation meetings in a cozy office downtown, papers spread across a shared desk, brainstorming sessions over lunch, and home, where their little one toddled about, chubby hands reaching for blocks or storybooks. Evenings often ended on the porch, John strumming a guitar he'd picked up as a hobby, Eva leaning against him as they watched the stars emerge, talking about the day's wins or the challenges ahead. It wasn't perfect. Old memories surface sometimes, quiet conversations mending any lingering aches. But it was real, built on trust and equality, a love that had weathered storms and emerged stronger. The foundation's impact rippled out, stories of lives rebuilt, like Elias Grant's firm now partnering with them on ethical supply chains, or New Michaels getting the fair shot they'd deserved. John and Eva stood as a true power couple, not in boardrooms of conquest, but in halls of change, their family a testament to second chances. As the sun set on another day, with their child giggling in the yard and hands intertwined, the sense of wholeness wrapped around them like a gentle embrace. Justice had been served, not through vengeance, but growth. Love had bloomed into something enduring, a happiness earned and shared, just as it should be. And so, a new journey truly begins. Thank you for listening and for joining us on Eva and John's emotional ride. Which moment of John's redemption or Eva's resilience resonated with you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story brought you a sense of warmth, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe so we can meet again on the next journey.